Over the course of the previous two modules, we have been exploring the factors that contribute to a student's success, the systemic factors requiring an equity perspective, and the social-emotional factors requiring empathy, vulnerability, and kindness. Now we are going to look at the factors taking place in the brain and how that impacts the way you should present information. In this module, we will be discussing the following topics. What is cognitive development? Adult learning theory, andragogy, the 4 C's. To begin, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Now go ahead and pause the video and take a few moments to answer these questions. What comes to mind when you hear the words cognitive development? How do you learn? How is this different than when you were a child? Create a quick list of 4 to 6 thoughts you have on how adults learn. What is cognitive development? Cognitive development is the construction of thought processes including remembering, problem-solving, and decision-making from childhood through adolescence to adulthood. Cognitive development refers to how a person perceives, thinks, and gains understanding of his or her world through the interactions of genetic and learned factors. The areas of cognitive development are information processing, intelligence, reasoning, language development, and memory. Because we spend so many years in adulthood, more than any other stage, cognitive changes are numerous during this period. In fact, research suggests that adult cognitive development is a complex and ever-changing process that may be even more active than cognitive development in infancy and early childhood. Unlike our physical abilities, which peak in our mid-20s and then begin a slow decline, our cognitive abilities remain relatively steady throughout the early and middle adulthood. Why does this matter to you as a tutor? Well, it's advantageous for tutors to understand cognitive development because it can help you improve your teaching and student learning. Tutors become more cognizant to how people process, learn, and remember information, which helps them plan more effective lessons and create positive learning environments for their students. Pause the video and complete the following exercise, applying what we have covered about adult development to your response. Please answer the following question. Why is it important for a tutor to know about cognitive development and how it relates to adults? Welcome back. It's time to move on to the next topic of discussion, andragogy. Every tutor's goal is to make learning as impactful and engaging as possible. But how? One method to master great training and course creation is by understanding how the learner's mind works. Adult learning theory, also known as andragogy, is a concept that has been around since 1833. It highlights the distinct ways adults best respond to learning, and it's a must-know for any tutor. Adult learning is a relatively simple theory to grasp, so let's explain what it is and how its principles can be applied to your tutoring strategies. Most educational theories, as well as formal educational institutions, have been developed exclusively to educate children and youths through a method known as pedagogy. Pedagogy is the traditional format of teaching, where the instructor carries the majority of responsibility for making decisions about learning content, method, and evaluation. In pedagogical teaching, students are generally seen as being passive recipients of directions and content, and bringing few experiences that may serve as resources to the learning environment. Educational psychologists recognizing the limitations of formal education theories, developed andragogy, where the student takes control of their learning process and the teacher becomes the facilitator to this process. This was originally established as a way for adults to learn, but research has emerged to back up the idea that this is how everyone learns. And indeed, Malcolm Knowles, the guy who coined this term, envisioned an educational system that integrated andragogy from the very beginning. But let's hear out Knowles' vision for that here.
In essence, as I see it, Roger, schooling should be concerned primarily with developing in the students skills in engaging in self-directed inquiry. And from the first grade on, the focus of teaching in the school should be on developing the skills of engaging in self-directed inquiry. So I would see the curriculum of the school really being just a sort of a spiral of inquiry projects, starting with the curiosities of the student at the first grade and having them engage in inquiries regarding their curiosities, then another set of curiosities in the second grade, curiosities about language, curiosities about mathematics, curiosities about the world, and so on. So I would see the climate of the school being one of self-direction, of self-directed learning, with the teacher serving as a manager of this process, a facilitator, a resource person to it, but and where relevant, a transmitter of information, but a transmitter of information only in the context of the inquiries that the students are engaging in.
So then a student might actually go out into the community, for example, and use some sort of a learning resource out there. Precisely.
The notion that the only resource for learning is the teacher, I think, is anti-educational. There are a rich variety of resources in other students, in the community agencies, in travel, and all sorts of things. This is a very subtle thing that when it gets across to students, however, makes an awful lot of difference in the learning. If they perceive the teacher as being an authoritative transmitter of a predetermined knowledge, then their just intuitive relationship with the teacher is that of dependency. The student who sees the teacher as being a transmitter of knowledge relates to that teacher in a dependent role, and the teacher expects that and induces that kind of relationship.
It affects their entire outlook on the class situation.
And on what learning is.
Certainly.
Sure. Now, on the other hand, if the teacher comes into the classroom situation seeing his or her role as being to facilitate the organization of self-directed learning experiences by the students, and sees himself or herself as a resource for the students to turn to as they would turn to a book or turn to a community experience or to any other resource, if they start looking at the teacher as another resource for learning rather than as an authoritative transmitter of predetermined knowledge, then a whole different kind of learning process gets induced.
Yes, right. And you really have to invest some early time in order to make it
in learning a new way of learning.
Absolutely.
And helping them learn a new way of learning. No, absolutely. Students have been so conditioned to come into an educational experience in an attitude of dependency toward the teacher that it's rather shocking to them. They experience a cultural shock in coming into a situation in which they're immediately involved in a collaborative relationship with the teacher. And it does take a lot of faith. You have to have faith in the process, that if you really use it, it'll work. And you have to have faith in the students that they really are capable of sharing responsibility with you.
I recently read an article where someone had set up a research design trying to test out some of the principles of andragogy, and they found that at the end of the class, where students had been involved in the planning and the implementing and the design of the course, that the achievement was not necessarily a lot greater.
That much different, yeah.
But the attitude toward learning and toward the classroom setting, and it seems to me that that's a very important thing if we can promote an attitude toward learning.
Absolutely, so that they leave the class feeling all charged up about going on further in their inquiry process. And this is what we mean by lifelong, continuing education or lifelong learning.
Note the way he describes the teacher. as a facilitator and a resource person, as a transmitter of information only insofar as the student is directing the process. The 6 principles of andragogy are: need to know. Now, adults need to know the reason they are being asked to learn. They need to understand what's in it for me, or what advantage they will gain by learning. Adult learners resist learning when they feel others are imposing information, ideas, or actions on them. One way is to explain the purpose of an activity or its objectives. Let them know in advance why they should pay attention and how it will personally better them. Better job opportunities, better communication, generally a better quality of life. The second quality is experience. As we've covered in our first topic, adult learners come with experience. This experience should provide the basis for much of the learning activities. Your job is to tie their experience to the material. Additionally, your learner's experience can add to the knowledge base. Leveraging this experience can be a motivator for your learners. As you learn your students' experiences, knowledge, and competencies, you can adapt your tutoring methods to suit them. Self-concept. Adults have a need to be responsible for their learning decisions, and in most cases, they gather their own identity from their experiences. They thrive on self-direction. You can help their need to learn autonomously by giving them some control over their learning. Online training is an excellent tool for providing this control. Readiness. Adults learn best when the training can help them solve an immediate, real-life problem. Think about it this way. How motivated were you to take your driving test? If you needed to drive or go to work or school, your motivation was likely very high. It was probably high even if your perception about driving was not that important. The same goes for work. How motivated are you to learn when you need to learn a new process or computer program to be able to complete your work? Again, you're probably very motivated. That is, if you want to keep your job. So motivation increases in adults when they become aware that the acquired information is useful to solve daily problems, both in their personal and their work life. Problem orientation. Adults learn best when content is problem-oriented. They want to learn specific knowledge, skills, and/or abilities that solve a problem rather than generic content. They don't want to necessarily focus on the content itself, but rather on its practical uses. Adults are much more likely to learn when they can feel the training helping them right now. To motivate them, help them identify a problem they will solve with the training. This will help them focus on learning as much as they can. Then, intrinsic motivation. Adults learn best when the motivation comes internally, rather than externally, but through prizes or incentives. This doesn't mean that all adults can't be motivated externally. They can. For example, my boss wants me to know this. If I don't learn it, I will be fired. For most people, this is definitely a motivator. But we would probably agree this isn't the best way to motivate an employee. A better way to motivate learners is to find their internal motivator. These intrinsic motivators are like knowing something makes them feel better about themselves or give them more opportunities to grow professionally or personally. These types of motivators have more long-term motivational power. So this is the introduction to the idea of andragogy. But to use the concept in your own work, you will need to make it your own. So look at the following terms on Google and see where they lead. Look up pedagogy, andragogy, and for a few deep cuts, oh boy, huetagogy, and the pedagogy of the oppressed. I don't think I pronounced that correctly. Anyway, post a few quotes from the articles and find videos that you might appreciate. The 4 C's in accelerated learning. How do we apply the principles of andragogy in a lesson? The principles of need to know, experience, self-concept, readiness, problem orientation, and intrinsic motivation can map upon a simple 4-step cognitive process known as accelerated learning. First, you prepare the student to learn by connecting their relevance and interest to the topic. Second, you present the knowledge they need to know. Third, the student practices it on their own and experiences the knowledge at work. Fourth, you encourage the student to apply what they learned in their life. The 4Cs map is an instructional design tool that will organize this process and show you and the learners where the instruction is going and the steps to get there. You will find that we try to follow the 4C model throughout these tutor training modules. So, what are they? So, connections, first C, beginning or opening a session. Learners actively make connections with what they already know or think they know about a topic. That's their prior knowledge. With what they will learn, and that's their learning objective. With what they want to learn, that's their personal goals. And then with each other, that's community building. You may have found that we are using this in these modules. We ask you to explain what you already know about the concept before we even begin to talk about the concept. Then we talk about the second C, concepts, the direct instruction, the lecture, the presentation, the session, the training. Learners take in the information in multi-sensory ways. You want to go hearing and seeing and discussing and writing and reflecting and imagining and participating, and then teaching it to others in short, quick review activities. This is the most pedagogic of the 4Cs. This is where the teacher teaches. But again, it's not comprehensive or exhaustive. It's what the student needs to know so they can continue learning. We know you're going to learn a lot as a tutor outside these modules. So instead of teaching you everything you need to know, we are trying to teach you everything you need to learn. Third C, concrete practice. Active review that follows information delivery. Learners actively practice the new skills, perform a task using the content, or participate in an extended active review of what they've learned, and then teach others what they know or can now do. We try to stop the module every so often and pause so you can get practice. Admittedly, this is a bit hard to do in our lower fidelity online modules, but in tutoring, you'll have more direct opportunities to connect with your student and get a great back and forth between connections and concrete practice and make that really fluid. Then the fourth C, conclusions. Wrapping up or closing part of the session of training. Learners summarize what they have learned, evaluated, celebrated, and then create action plans for how they plan to use the knowledge and skills in life, in homework, in future sessions. We are trying to accomplish this where we follow up with you afterwards on any questions you may have, set the first steps of your tutoring path, and celebrate the completion of your training. The 4Cs is an important concept and structure that we will touch on a second time near the end of the training or the middle in the lesson planning module. There you will learn how to use the 4Cs in a very practical way. The purpose of this module, however, is to show you the cognitive process that informs that model. So, connecting the dots in the spirit of concrete practice, I'd like to ask you to draw out these connections for yourself. When is the last time, besides this training, when you learned a new skill? It doesn't have to be academic in nature. It could be something to do with fixing up your house or how to order something at the store. Can you identify the processes, incentives, and techniques that made this learning possible? How did it make this possible? And what would the learning process have been without these processes, incentives, and techniques? That's the end of this module on cognitive development. I look forward to seeing you in the next module.